I want you to think about a highly specific, like very visceral feeling for a second. Have you ever felt this strange, almost physical sense of discomfort when someone breaks a minor unspoken social rule?
Oh, like when someone gets in an elevator and faces the back wall instead of the doors?
Exactly,
Yeah.
yes. Or, picture walking into a routine meeting at work and someone is just sitting in the wrong unassigned seat. Or maybe you're at the grocery store and you see a little boy walking down the cereal aisle wearing a sparkling princess dress.
Right. Yeah.
The reaction you have to those things isn't logical. And it isn't necessarily malicious either. It's just this tightness in your chest, like a
Hmm.
tiny alarm bell going off in your gut. So where does that sudden, involuntary bodily reaction actually come from?
Well, it basically comes from our fundamental biological drive for predictability. Like we're literally wired to seek out the familiar.
Because constantly assessing new things is exhausting.
Exactly. It requires a massive amount of cognitive energy. So to save that energy, our brains build these invisible cognitive schemas,
Hmm.
basically social scripts, so we can navigate the world on autopilot.
Making sense of the chaos.
Right. And when the script gets flipped, even in a completely harmless way, our brains instantly register a discrepancy. It feels like a threat response because, cognitively speaking, a pattern has just been broken.
And what society decides to do with those broken patterns is exactly what we are unpacking in today's deep dive. We're exploring this concept called norm critique or norm critic.
Grown in Scandinavia, right?
Yeah, and it's fundamentally changing how educators, healthcare workers, and just modern workplaces in general approach the very idea of inclusion.
That's a huge shift.
It really is. And we have a massive, very diverse stack of sources to sift through today for you. We're pulling insights from early 2000s educational research, municipal field reports from Danish kindergartens, sociological debates out of Sweden, and even some pretty fierce political critiques from both ends of the spectrum.
It's a lot to cover. But to ground this, we can look at the foundational definition provided by the organization LGBT plus Denmark in our sources.
Okay, let's start there.
So they define norm critique as the active, deliberate practice of questioning accepted societal norms. Things like the assumption of binary gender or, compulsory heterosexuality. Basically, norms that inherently exclude or marginalize people.
So it's about not taking the status quo for granted.
Exactly. The core premise is that what we just casually consider normal isn't some natural law of the universe. It's really just a set of unwritten rules. And anyone falling outside those parameters is immediately, and often subconsciously, labeled as deviant.
The history of how we handle that deviance is just
Mhm.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Because for decades, the absolute gold standard in education and society was tolerance. We were all taught, just be tolerant.
Right. Tolerance was the buzzword.
But the sources reveal this massive pedagogical pivot away from tolerance and directly toward norm critique.
Yeah, and the scholar, Simon Yergard Iverson, really crystallizes the mechanics of that shift in our materials. Because in traditional tolerance pedagogy, the entire focus remains fixated on the marginalized person.
Like they are the subject of the exercise.
Right. The underlying logic is basically, this person is different, they're the alien in the room, but we're going to demonstrate our own goodness and morality by accepting them in spite of their differences.
Which, leaves the underlying social structure entirely unquestioned.
Totally intact, yeah.
It's like apologizing to a player who is losing a rigged board game, but not doing anything about the rules. The alien is still viewed as the problem that requires our gracious tolerance. But norm critique, it basically flips the board over entirely.
Splits the camera around.
Yeah. It stops analyzing the marginalized person and instead shines this harsh, glaring spotlight on the invisible, normal rules of the community. It forces the group to ask why their environment is constructed in a way that creates an alien in the first place.
A really helpful way to visualize the difference is to think about a computer's operating system.
Oh, I like this.
Yeah, so tolerance is essentially just changing your desktop wallpaper to a picture of diverse people. Like, it looks nice, but the software functions exactly the same underneath.
Right.
Norm critique is going into the backend code and rewriting the operating system itself so that it doesn't crash when a new, unfamiliar type of file is introduced. It shifts the burden of adaptation from the individual file to the system architecture itself.
But see, the friction here for me seems to be the very definition of a norm. Because statistically speaking, a norm is often just an average, right?
Sure,
Like
statistically.
if 90% of people are right-handed, being right-handed is just the statistical norm. At what point does a simple, neutral statistical majority cross the line into becoming this oppressive power structure?
Well, that is the exact threshold Kevin Kumashiro explores in his foundational research. This goes back to the year 2000, looking at anti-oppressive education.
Okay, what does he say?
Kumashiro explains that in human society, norms never remain neutral statistics. They rapidly solidify into power structures. I mean, think about your right-handed example. When the world is designed by and for right-handed people, left-handed people struggle daily with scissors, desk orientations, heavy machinery.
Oh, that's true. The desks in college lecture halls were a nightmare for my left-handed friends.
Exactly. The statistical norm dictates the physical and social design of the world. Therefore, Kumashiro argues, when we do not actively interrogate societal norms around things like gender, race, or physical ability, we are passively reproducing inequality.
Because we just keep building the world for the average.
Right. We continue to build a world optimized only for the statistical average, leaving everyone else to navigate an environment that inherently works against them.
Okay, so if the underlying code is what needs rewriting, seeing how everyday people actually attempt to do that on the ground is where this gets highly practical.
Absolutely.
The sources include a municipal report from Fredensborg Municipality in Denmark detailing this project called Equality and Learning Opportunities. And the field observations from these kindergartens illustrate the exact mechanism of changing the back-end code.
Kindergartens provide a perfect laboratory for this because children are right in the active phase of building those cognitive schemas we talked about earlier.
Yeah, the wet cement phase. So in one observation, there's a little girl on the playground, and she wants to play firefighter with 4 little boys. But the boys exclude her. They literally cannot envision a girl in the role of a firefighter, so they just block her from joining.
Which is a classic playground scenario.
Totally. And the old tolerance approach would be for a teacher to intervene, right? Like scold the boys, tell them to be nice, tell them to share, and basically force them to let her play.
Which rarely works on a cognitive level. I mean, scolding might force compliance, but it breeds resentment. And it does absolutely nothing to alter their underlying mental model that firefighters are men.
Exactly. So the pedagogue in this study, applying norm critique, she doesn't try to fix the children. She fixes the environment.
Changing the game.
Literally. She initiates a brand new fire extinguisher game exclusively with the girl. And she makes this new game so dynamic and engaging that the 4 boys eventually just wander over, drawn by the activity, and they want to join in.
That's brilliant.
Right. The environment shifts naturally until all 5 children are playing together. They disrupted the norm that excluded the girl, but they did it without shaming the boys for an assumption they had simply absorbed from the culture around them.
It's a profound shift in methodology. You are not fighting the symptom, the exclusion.
Yeah.
You are redesigning the play structure so the exclusion just no longer makes sense.
Yeah. And the physical impact of doing this is highlighted in another observation of the report. This is the plate experiment.
Oh, this one is fascinating.
It is. So a pedagogue decides to deliberately mess with the gendered colors at lunchtime. She purposefully gives the boys the pink and purple plates and the girls the blue and green plates.
And how do the kids react?
The children themselves do not care at all. They just eat their lunch.
Right.
But the adult pedagogue notes in the report that handing out the plates this way gave her actual physical discomfort.
See, that brings us full circle to your opening question about the tightness in the chest. That pedagogue has experienced decades of intense societal conditioning dictating what is appropriate, down to the color of a cheap piece of plastic.
It's wild how deep it goes.
It is. Breaking that tiny norm triggered cognitive dissonance for her. Her brain recognized a pattern violation and fired off a physical stress response. It's just a brilliant illustration of how deeply embedded these invisible rules are in adult neurology.
You can really see how a pink plate in kindergarten translates to much larger societal structures later on. Because the sources connect these early childhood schemas directly to systemic adult issues, especially in the UC Knowledge Nursing article and the case study on norm-critical pedagogy and management.
Right. We see the long-term compounding effects clearly in Denmark. Because despite having an exceptionally high female workforce participation rate, the Danish labor market remains highly gender segregated.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Women overwhelmingly dominate the care professions, while men completely dominate STEM and the trades. And the research is clear that children's innate cognitive capacities do not dictate these divergent interests. Social norms do.
So the narrow paths we lay out for them in kindergarten basically harden into the highways they drive on as adults.
That's a great way to put it.
So intervening early prevents those schemas from hardening. But applying this in adult fields like nursing, that takes on a whole new layer of urgency in the sources. It's framed as a necessary practice to reduce health inequality, aligning directly with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 10.
Because in a medical setting, assumptions can severely compromise care. A nurse utilizing norm critique trains themselves not to assume a patient's spouse is of the opposite sex, for instance. Or they don't assume that an elderly patient is no longer sexually active. Or that a patient's presentation matches a specific biological sex.
Just stripping away the defaults.
Exactly. By systematically stripping away those normative assumptions, healthcare providers gather much more accurate medical histories, and they provide equitable care that is tailored to the reality of the patient, rather than the expectation of the system.
But training adults to systematically break down their own ingrained assumptions, that is a massive undertaking. Our Swedish Wikipedia source outlines some of the specific methods used in these adult training seminars, like the privilege walk.
Oh, right. Very common exercise.
Yeah, participants stand in a horizontal line, and a facilitator reads out statements based on identity or background. Like, if your parents went to college, take a step forward. Or, if you have ever been mocked for your sexual orientation, take a step backward.
And by the end of the exercise, the physical layout of the people in the room visually maps out the invisible power structures of society.
But when an adult steps backward during that exercise, what is actually happening in their brain? Like, is the goal to induce shame, or is it supposed to trigger a broader structural realization?
The pedagogical intent is definitely the latter. It's designed to take an abstract concept, like systemic advantage or disadvantage, and turn it into a physical, spatial reality. It forces a cognitive realization.
So you can't ignore it.
Right. When you physically see yourself at the front of the room or the back of the room, based on factors largely out of your control, the invisible code of the operating system suddenly becomes very visible.
They also utilize this thing called the Teflon test, which is a self-reflection tool designed to see what societal privileges stick to you and what slide off unnoticed. But the implementation of these tools leads to a fascinating theoretical roadblock.
The paradox.
Yes. The expert journal Dansk Pedagogisk Tidsskrift introduces the idea that norm critique might actually be an oxymoron.
Yeah.
They refer to it as a burning snowman.
The burning snowman. It's a highly evocative metaphor for the inherent contradiction of the practice, because the very nature of a social norm is that it operates in the background, right? It's unquestioned.
Unconscious, yeah.
But the very nature of critique is the act of dragging things into the foreground and relentlessly questioning them.
They cannot logically occupy the same space. I mean, think about your own workplace for a second. If human resources suddenly mandated that everyone must constantly question and dismantle traditional professionalism, wouldn't that mandate just become the exhausting new rule you have to follow?
Yeah.
You are essentially replacing one strict set of behavioral rules with another strict set of rules.
And Sarah Christofferson, a professor of design history at the Konstfack Design School, argues that this is precisely what has happened. She states that norm critique has morphed into an unquestioned buzzword. It's basically become the new dogma, the new rule book that you are absolutely not allowed to question.
Which introduces a pretty dangerous level of intellectual dishonesty, doesn't it?
She thinks so. She points out that in these highly critical environments, only certain norms are prioritized for dismantling, typically those surrounding gender and ethnicity. Meanwhile, norms around socioeconomic class, age, or functional ability are frequently ignored.
Interesting.
Yeah, so by selectively dismantling a few targeted norms while strictly enforcing new behavioral rules around them, she argues we aren't eliminating hierarchies at all. We're just inadvertently creating new ones with different people at the top.
And when you look at a structural shift this fundamental, it is no surprise that our sources show intense pushback from across the entire political spectrum. Now, I want to be really clear with you, the listener, right here. We are looking at this objectively. The sources contain highly charged political critiques from both the right and the left. We are not endorsing any of these viewpoints. We are just impartially reporting the arguments found in the source material to give you the complete picture of this debate.
It's important context.
Definitely. So, looking objectively, the arguments on both sides reveal deep existential anxieties about how a functioning society maintains cohesion. Let's start with the conservative pushback.
Right. So from the conservative and right-wing perspective, articulated by figures like the Swedish politician Ebba Busch, the argument is that this constant deconstruction is actively undermining societal stability.
How so?
Well, the sociological foundation for this anxiety traces back to Emil Durkheim. and his concept of anomie, which roughly translates to normlessness.
Normlessness, okay.
Durkheim theorized that human beings are not built for total unbounded freedom. We actually require clear social scripts and shared expectations to guide our behavior and give our lives a sense of meaning and place.
Wait, so if you aggressively tear down all the social scripts, people don't suddenly feel liberated and free?
Not according to Durkheim, they feel entirely adrift. That is the core of the anomie concept. Without a shared understanding of what is expected, humans become deeply unhappy, aimless, and alienated.
Wow.
Durkheim famously noted that in states of severe anomie, societal suicide rates measurably rise. The conservative argument is that you aren't just freeing someone from a cage, you are stranding them in a desert without a map or a compass.
There is also a severe historical critique of the methods themselves in our sources. Therese Malmberg compares the mechanics of mandatory norm-critical group exercises to Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution in China.
That's a heavy comparison.
Extremely. Her argument focuses on the mechanism of group pressure. She suggests that the facilitators in these seminars are not acting as neutral teachers. They are ideological moderators, using the immense weight of peer pressure to ensure everyone conforms to the new groupthink. Like, if you question the premise of the privilege walk, you risk public shaming and professional ostracization.
And Sten Widmann builds on this by pointing out a massive democratic paradox at the heart of the movement. He argues it is fundamentally absurd to mandate norm critique from a top-down institutional level.
Right.
Think about it. A government agency or a corporate HR department issuing a directive telling citizens they must critically question authority and norms. It's a complete contradiction in terms. You cannot mandate rebellion.
You really can't. But the criticism from the political left is equally punishing in these sources, though for entirely different reasons. The Marxist critique of norm critique, as outlined by sociologists Staff Callaward and Daniel Callos, views this entire movement, which they disparagingly call the pink wave, as a massive distraction.
Yeah, they argue that modern norm critique is essentially a toothless neoliberal trend. To understand this critique, we really have to look at where the focus lies. Neoliberalism places an intense, hyper-specific focus on the individual psychology, personal identity, and interpersonal language.
While the classic Marxist critique focuses on collective material realities, right?
Yeah.
Like structural capitalism and class warfare.
Precisely. The Marxist argument is that spending endless hours in seminars analyzing the microdynamics of pronouns or the colors of kindergarten plates entirely dilutes the focus on actual structural power. It gives institutions the illusion of enacting radical change without requiring them to alter their economic structures.
If we go back to our computer operating system analogy, the Marxist critique is that norm-critical practitioners are aggressively arguing over how to rewrite the back-end code so the interface feels more inclusive, while completely ignoring the fact that the computer itself is unplugged from the power source because the workers couldn't afford the electric bill. It's radical aesthetics masquerading as structural change, leaving the actual economic inequalities perfectly intact, like taking a sledgehammer to the foundation of a house. Proponents say you are freeing the inhabitants from a prison, while the critics say you are just collapsing the roof on their heads.
The entire concept is under intellectual assault from all sides. Conservatives fear it destroys the vital cohesion of society, while Marxists argue it acts as a corporate shield to protect capitalism from genuine class critique.
So, synthesizing this huge stack of diverse sources, what does this actually mean for you as you navigate your day-to-day life? Why does a pedagogical debate born in Scandinavia matter outside of academic journals?
Because the underlying questions it raises do not stay in the classroom. They dictate the evolving rules of the world you operate in. Whether you are prepping for a complicated meeting on corporate diversity, trying to advocate for an elderly parent in a modern healthcare system, or simply trying to decode the intense cultural clashes you see on social media, understanding the mechanics of norm critique is an incredible tool.
It really provides a lens for all of it.
It does. It provides a concrete vocabulary for why people are so profoundly defensive right now. It forces us to routinely evaluate our own actions. Like, when we interact with a colleague or a stranger, are we genuinely treating them fairly based on who they are? Or are we just treating them normally based on a script we didn't write?
And the challenge of evaluating our own scripts brings us to one final thought for you to mull over. Let's run a thought experiment to end the dive. Let's say the absolute purest vision of norm critique eventually wins out. We successfully dismantle all societal expectations, all the invisible scripts, and all the confining boxes we had historically forced people into.
A completely blank slate.
Right. What happens to the human brain's evolutionary biological demand for pattern recognition? Our neurology evolves to categorize the world in order to survive it. If we successfully burn down all the old boxes, will our brains simply allow us to exist in a state of fluid, unbroken complexity? Or will our neurology quietly, subconsciously, begin building new, invisible boxes to manage the cognitive load? The very next time you feel that tiny alarm bell go off in your chest because someone is sitting in the wrong chair, ask yourself who built that chair and why your brain expects them to sit there.